Welcome everyone to today's Strategies for Career Change webinar brought to you by the Office of Alumni Relations and our Career by Design programs. My name is Michele Rapp. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy, so I work on organizing different career programming, whether it's webinars, live events, or career coaching. And I'm glad you're joining us today. I'm also here with my colleague Diana Bronchuk, who some of you may know, and she's our resident tech wizard and providing support today as well. As we get started, I'd love for you to indicate some of the types of career changes that you're in the process of making. To use the chat box to participate or ask questions, if you go to the purple arrow on the lower right-hand corner, click on that, and it's the little bubble icon that will take you to the chat box to join the conversation. So this workshop is focused on the idea of changing career direction, oftentimes people changing the type of work that they're doing or the industry that they're in, sometimes called career pivots. And if you're more of just going for another job in the same field, that's okay too. So some of this information will pertain to you, but it's a little more targeted towards the idea of changing direction. And the good news is that we do live in a culture where it's okay to change direction. We have opportunities to do that. You may know people or yourself have made some big changes or some smaller changes. So it's common. And today we're going to focus on some of the strategies to make this process go well. And again, I'm interested if you would like to share in the chat box what type of change you're making. And actually, the other thing you could indicate is any challenges that you're facing. So I'm just going to talk about the process, the topics that I'm covering today. One is just talking about the process, what happens when you're making a change and what are the best ways to go about it. The role of self-assessment, and the importance of networking for career changers. I'll also talk about some resume, cover letter, and interview tips. You'll also be looking at how do I develop new skills and knowledge for this career change. And I really want you to leave here with some action steps. So as we're going through this, perhaps take some notes of some things you're going to implement that you're hearing about today. So starting with the process of making a change. Again, some of you may be making a big change or a small change, but some of the steps and aspects of it are similar. So you want to start with self-assessment, looking at yourself. What have you enjoyed in your work? What are your strengths? What do you want to be different in a next position? What are your goals? What are your priorities? Where are you heading? You can even do a career assessment tool, which our career design office can help you with. You're thinking about what are your strengths. We're often happiest when we're using our strengths at work. So think about what you want to emphasize. So one approach to this, so let's say some common changes, like sometimes people go from corporate to nonprofit. I made a change from being in corporate training to career coaching. Going from sales to marketing can be another type of change. And again, some people make really drastic changes, like from, I actually know someone who went from being a physician to being a chocolatier. So for every job seeker, you're always trying to think of where is this going to be easiest to make this kind of change? What advantages, what path would be least resistance? So one strategy here can be to change your role, but not your industry. So maybe I want to go from finance to marketing, but I'm still going to stay in the biotech industry. So the idea is you have that knowledge of the industry, but it's the role that's changing. The other way is to change industries, but not roles. So I may want to stay in biotech, stay in HR, so my role stays the same, but I may want to switch from higher ed to consumer goods. And it's not that you can't do both at the same time, but it can be easier to be able to transfer one of those aspects. A key thing for career changers is to focus on transferable skills. What are you bringing from the work you have done or the knowledge that you have into your new field, and your job is to make employers understand that. So this will lead you to change your resume to really reflect the transferable skills, and also updating your LinkedIn. In addition, contract work and temporary work can play a role in this process. So I recommend to people to be open to it, because it can help you get a foot in the door somewhere and build up new contacts. And the other thing is that the process can take 2 job changes. So you may get there in one job change, but for some people it's a series of 2 steps, and it may be 2 jobs. So when you think about the process, I am interested in any challenges that you are facing or that you perceive facing in making your change. So if you'd like to add that into the chat box, that would be great. Okay, so Lizanne was identifying staying in a related field and having transferable skills. Maybe they're not always perceived in the way that you're perceiving them, so that can be a challenge. I'll just give people a chance to, if other people want to write any challenges that they're facing, we'll take a look at those. So in the meantime, I'm going to just say a little bit about the self-assessment part. Again, you can do a formal career assessment tool if you're feeling lost. Something to think about is, so what are the interests that I have, and what are the skills I want to use in my next job? Those are really critical. One of my favorite questions to ask people is, what do you want more of or less of as you make a change? So sometimes people want less administrative tasks, more supervisory experience, maybe you want more collaboration. So often we're just seeking to tweak something for what suits us better. Another way to approach thinking about a change is, what do you want to learn in your next job? New skills, again, it might be learning about an industry, might be becoming a supervisor, manager, learning software, learning certain products or coding, those kind of things. Some other aspects to consider are, what settings? Do I want to be in a large organization? Do I want to be in a startup? Do I want to be in a small organization? And whatever amount of experience you have, what have you learned about the kind of organizational culture that's a good fit for you? And then as you may actually have 3 ideas that you're exploring for a career change. I recommend using a site like Indeed.com to look at job ads so that you can start to understand some different job titles, see what the tasks are, and then more importantly, see what the qualifications are. You don't have to have 100%. I think if you have about 75%, that's often good, but it will start to give you some information of what are your transferable skills, what are some things that you don't know that you need to know. And ONET, which I've listed here, is another site that has career information about different job titles. It has some trend information. It talks about the backgrounds of people, the training to get into a particular field, and some salary ranges. And that can be very helpful for researching different job titles. Right, and Betsy's pointing out that hiring managers can get hung up on job titles and only see you as your job title. So there can be some tricks with that, like on a resume, even how you use bold can make a difference. So sometimes using bold on your employers, but de-emphasizing the job titles by not putting them in bold can help. And then we're going to talk about, again, the role of networking as being really critical, because people will see you less as your resume, less as your job title when you're just having a conversation with them. So I'd like you to pause for a minute and just jot down some notes about some of these questions, like the more of, less of, the learning, what are some skills and interests that you want to use. Just take a couple of minutes. I see Arlene's pointing out, some of the challenges of convincing an interviewer that you have the right skill set and how you're perceived. So we will talk about that in terms of some interview strategies. But it can be, right, it is, when you are shifting directions, you are learning a new field. So you are shifting to being a learner, and that may feel like being a beginner. Yes, and as Jennifer's saying, just becoming familiar with articulating the similarities. I always think of this as being a lawyer making your case. So you're always making your case to the employer you're trying to convince them. And Brian, thanks for your question too. So how can my skills get me into one of these roles? And we're going to also talk about, again, the role that networking can play in this. And for a lot of people, it can be looking at how do I get some new experience. One thing that we'll talk about some more too is, let's say, being involved with a professional association in the area that you're moving towards, because sometimes those relationships can also help you get introductions and be perceived as already in the field that you want to be in. So this networking piece. So the reason that networking is more of an issue, networking is really critical for everybody in a job search. I'm always pushing that. You should spend about 80% of your time networking in any job search. For career changers, it's really critical because if an employer is getting, let's say, 50 resumes, they're more likely to seek someone out if someone's making a change into user experience design. If people already have that job title, those people are going to get favored. So those of you that are shifting, you may not look like what the recruiter is expecting, and it's harder to get noticed on a pile of resumes. So coming in through your contacts, coming in through networking channels is going to be better for you because you're going to be less viewed in terms of your current job title. Informational interviews are really helpful for, if you're looking into user experience design, you want to be talking to people in that field. The information that you get from those conversations will help you during your interviews. And again, it gives you the opportunity to get in front of people. So you're getting in front of people in the field, maybe they're making some introductions, and you're probably learning things that you can't learn from just applying to jobs. Seek out, especially as you're talking to people, ask them what professional groups they're involved with. So you want to get out to association events. In some fields, meetups, especially in the tech world, the meetup.com site is a source of people getting together to talk about how they're using particular software and to talk about the industry. Arlene is asking a question about, do you think networking is better done in person or by LinkedIn? I would definitely vote for in person. I think that's just a stronger contact. LinkedIn is such a great tool for finding people and getting in contact with them. Certainly, if you have constraints on being able to leave your office for coffee or to have the privacy to meet with someone, definitely by phone would be good. But I think, just through typing or email or LinkedIn, people aren't going to take the time to really get in depth, and they're not going to get to know you as well. As you're networking, you may also find that you're coming across other career changers. You may see that in people's profiles, and sometimes that commonality, sometimes that kind of hiring manager is more open because they've been a career changer, or you might be meeting career changers who can give you some advice. Also, finding a mentor in your field can be helpful. Some associations have mentoring programs. Other times, if you're out talking to people, you may meet someone and just have some nice rapport with them and ask them if they would be a sort of mentor to you. And Brian, we'll follow up in terms of whether we can do something about people connecting. I guess if people would like to connect, actually, I'll follow up on figuring that part out. So I'd like you to just take a minute here to jot down some ideas of association events you may want to attend, or just think about some people that you'd like to have a conversation with, maybe an informational interview with.
sending emails to people who are
anyone have any experiences they want to share in terms of how having some informational interviews has been helpful, or some of the kind of events that they have found helpful? And actually, another thing is that sometimes there are job seeker networking groups as well, which is not as specific as going to an association, but it can still be helpful. And actually, I want to mention a resource. Arlene mentioned having a career gap for raising a family. There's a great organization called iRelaunch, and their newsletters, their emails and newsletters are very helpful for those who are relaunchers. And Arlene's also mentioning the problem of your resume not getting to the right person. I definitely recommend, anytime that you know or see that you have a contact within an organization, it's really fine to ask if they'd be willing to share your application with someone internally. That can make a huge difference. I just did it for someone recently, because it often means that your application is being looked at as one as opposed to one of 30. And also, the process, you want to just be gathering information. What are the obstacles or perceived obstacles that recruiters may have? In terms of asking people to forward your application, I think what's harder is if someone doesn't know you. I think it's pretty hard for them, unless some people are motivated by internal company referral bonuses. So sometimes that might make someone willing, but I would say in general, it's better to go through someone that knows you to some degree. The other approach is if you're really interested, like someone told me they were interested in the company Wayfair. So if you know that, go find Northeastern alums there, or go find contacts there so that you're ready when a job opening comes up. So something I'm excited to share with you today is we have a brand new networking platform for Northeastern alumni, and it's called NUsource. So our hope is that this will make it a lot easier to connect with alums. We are in the middle of starting to launch and grow the site, so we know the site will get more valuable the more people join. What makes NUsource a warm contact is that when you create a profile, you'll be checking off help topics that you're willing to advise others about. So when you're reaching out to someone, you know more what they're thinking about, what they're willing to do. And you can do different geographic and different job title searches. We also have started with some industry groups like marketing and nonprofit and women in STEM. We also have some affinity-based groups like Asian alumni, Black alumni, and we are open to suggestions for other groups. So definitely add that into the mix of your networking efforts, and know that more people are going to be joining over the next few months. So a couple of tips about resume, cover letter, and interviews. Especially for career changers, having a summary section can really make a difference. So I see the summary section as a short marketing pitch, kind of like an elevator pitch, but it's also a way to market and tie together your experience briefly, to help someone see it the way you want them to see it. And I'll share some examples in a minute. You've probably heard as a job seeker that keywords matter. So employers are using these applicant tracking systems to search their resume databases. So you can think about, if I was searching for someone in my profession, what are the keywords that I would use? You can also get keyword ideas from the job listing. So what seems to be some of the important skills in this job? And certainly software, technical, or industry language can often be critical keywords. So they want you to know certain programming software, for example. Again, your resume should focus on transferable skills, and know that you can move those items to the top of your bullets. You might drop out some bullets from your previous work experience that are less relevant, because you want people to focus on the transferable skills. Cover letters have gotten interesting lately, because I do hear from recruiters that they often don't look at them, but especially as a career changer, it may be that a manager does read the cover letter. And I see the cover letter as a chance to make your case for that particular position. You can also mention something about your career change, why you're changing direction, and it's your chance to emphasize your relevant transferable skills. So your resume is like a general summary of your experience, so your cover letter is meant to highlight things particular to that position. So they're short. You can also use bullets to make it easier to follow. And then as you prepare for interviews, it's also really critical that you're picking examples of your experiences that are about those transferable skills. You may have heard of this formula for behavioral questions, and behavioral questions are the kind of questions that say, tell me about a time when you had to handle a difficult customer, or tell me about a time that you had to deliver bad news, or tell me about a challenging project that you worked on. So a framework for behavioral questions is problem, action, result. So you're describing the problem or the task you were dealing with, some of the challenges. You want to focus on the action that you took and the positive outcome. So if you have a good 5 to 7 of those examples, you'll feel much more prepared for an interview. And you want to pick examples that are going to put you in the best light for the role that you're trying to move towards. Every interviewer should anticipate objections. You don't have enough of this experience, or what about this? What about that? And while you may not have an exact experience, what you do want to emphasize is perhaps something similar that you did. If it has to do with learning software, for example, you might show your willingness to take a class in that topic, or you may show how you quickly learned a difficult software and put it to use. So again, you're trying to put the interviewer at ease that you would learn quickly and that you've done related and relevant things. But definitely try to anticipate, and as you do more interviews, it may be clear what the objections are, but definitely try to anticipate and prepare for those. My favorite thing is to actually think about how your background being different can be an advantage. So how is it an advantage to come from corporate going into nonprofit, or the other way around? So a lot of times you may have a broader perspective coming from diverse industries than having only been in one industry or role. Or how can, being a musician help you as a what may be a perceived disadvantage to an advantage. So I want to pause here and see what questions you have about resume, cover letter, or interview. Anyone have any challenges with these areas, or just questions about resume, cover letter, interview? Okay. And I see some people are typing, so I'm looking forward to some questions here. Actually, as people are typing, I want to mention one other strategy on the resume. Sometimes on a resume, by creating different subheadings about your experience, it allows you to move something else forward higher on your resume. So I might have put a nonprofit experience and list those positions, and then I may have marketing experience and list those positions. So it allows me to group my experience using bold on those subheadings to help an employer see it and think about it differently. So that's kind of a technique. And I'm actually going to change the screen here because I do have 2 summary statements. And just to mention these, so the first one is just it's a sentence, but a short summary can be like 2 or 3 sentences to tie together your experience. And the second one has that intro, the paragraph, but then bullets out some key areas. I've also seen some resumes where people have maybe six or 8 bullets, and they do them in 2 columns, so 4 and 4. And my favorite thing too is to also use LinkedIn to get ideas for your summary. And for any other aspect of your resume, so when you're looking, if I'm trying to move into healthcare data analytics, I'm going to look at people's resumes that have that experience, look at how they're presenting themselves, and it may spark some ideas for things that you want to emphasize. So the summary can be brief, but again, you're trying to package yourself. And some of you may have some particular questions too that we could talk about offline, about some specific strategies. Resume length, depends on how much experience you have. I wouldn't go longer than 2 pages unless you're in higher ed, where if you're an academic, and sometimes in administration, it can be okay to go longer. Some of those resumes might list conferences and presentations and things like that. And you really want to focus on making it easy to read. The other thing is that you may have volunteer experiences that have allowed you to use certain skills or that round out how you present your experience. So that can be helpful as well. And John, I would say that for some reason, summary has become trendier and more cool than objective. So objectives have kind of gone by the wayside in favor of a summary. And I would say, if you're really recently out of a program, out of school, or really early in your career, you don't need a summary. But again, it can be helpful to career changers. So the other thing is, as you prepare to change direction, you may find that you need to boost your learning. And you're going to want to do that, but also put it on your resume, so really show that. One example that comes to mind is I'd worked with a lawyer who was getting an MBA degree, but he was really interested in environmental issues and working in that industry. So he started going to a lot of conferences and seminars. So he added that to his resume. So that shows an employer like, hey, I'm serious about making this change. I'm building my knowledge. I'm networking with people in the industry, and I know what's going on. So you definitely want to show that. If you take a class, when I wanted to shift from corporate training to career counseling, I took a course at a college, and I put that on my resume. So you're making your case. You're showing movement. You're showing that you're adding new skills. Many of you may find out that it's necessary to get a certificate or a degree or some sort of certification. Some people get like a Microsoft certification in certain products, for example. And those things should definitely go on your resume. Just as a reminder, of course, Northeastern has lots of great master's programs and certificate programs, even some shorter ramping up learning programs. There is a double Husky discount for a lot of the master's programs. So keep Northeastern in mind as a great resource. And also, there are groups like General Assembly now for people ramping up into technical skills. There are often some ways to pick up those skills quickly. Again, if you become active in the American Marketing Association, Boston chapter, or other groups, add those to your resume because it'll show an employer what you're doing and the exposure. Same thing if you go to a conference. And reading publications in your field is just generally a good idea. And even things like in Boston, I like the Boston Business Journal, sometimes following business trends or looking for profiles about people that you may want to reach out to and contact. There are, sometimes a volunteer opportunity will let you build a skill. If you want to be a PR person, there's a lot of nonprofits that could use your help in writing press releases or writing for their newsletter. you may be able to create a project or sort of a semi-internship for yourself. And again, you definitely want to put that on your resume. I have found I was on the board of a career counselors organization, and that network of contacts was really helpful to my career. Also, sometimes by serving with a group, school board or a professional association, sometimes that lets you use new skills and even see your skills in different ways. For many people, starting a blog or a podcast can be a great way to start to use the skills that you want to be using and build a portfolio that you can show to an employer. I've seen people, actually worked with someone who was gotten a PhD in literature, but he wasn't getting jobs in that field, and he was interested in the music industry, so he started writing for a music industry blog, which allowed him to go to concerts, get in contact with performers, and also begin to have some work, a body of work to show potential employers. So people love to see evidence of the skill set, and then you're not waiting for someone to hire you. You're just hiring yourself to start diving into your industry and showing your passion, showing your enthusiasm for that new direction. And now podcasts have become an avenue for that. If you're a graphic designer, for example, or a tech person, a web designer, your ability to start to build a portfolio. So again, maybe it's creating websites for friends or people that you're meeting at professional events, or doing graphic design for a nonprofit. But that lets you have that portfolio that's going to convince someone to hire you. So you're creating evidence of your skill set and your commitment to that new field. And again, there may be temp work or contract work that's a nice entry point into working in a different industry, and again, building up your resume. Just want to pause and see if there's any questions related to this idea of new learning and using it to build your resume.
Michelle, we have one question. What are your recommendations for resume length? Sometimes it seems to depend on the industry.
Yes, and for that, I wouldn't feel tied to having it be one page. So one page, earlier in your career, 2 pages is fine. And again, with academic resumes, those or CVs, those can be longer, like in people with PhDs, scientists, that kind of thing. But in general, so know your field, what's typical. Even sometimes computer science can be a longer resume detailing projects, but for many people, it's 1 to 2 pages. And there was a question about not having a hiring manager's name. With cover letters, there definitely was a time that people wanted you to do that, and I think now it's just become so difficult that no one expects that. So I would it's a little awkward, but I like to say to the hiring manager. I think that that's fine, and employers don't expect you to do otherwise. In some cases, there may be a case where the hiring manager, and sometimes you can even send an application to an individual in addition to applying to the company's website. But yeah, don't worry about that part. Any other, we have a couple other, feel free to pose any questions or thinking about challenges. Yes, how many years on a resume? Now it's common to say like 12 years is fine, 15 years is fine. There certainly can be perceptions about age issues, so that can be a factor. Everything with the resume still should be a lot about relevance to what you're trying to do. So sometimes people have an earlier position that might hold some value because of the industry that it was in, or that if you've been with an employer a long time, it was with a different employer. And then in other cases, going back far just doesn't help you at all. It doesn't do anything. Sometimes people usually the earlier positions become shorter on the resume. And sometimes people like to show the experience, but not go into the detail. So they may keep the employer, location, job title, and dates, but not give the bullets. So always be thinking about relevance.
Michele, in terms of relevance, should you put your interests in the different industry in your resume summary?
Okay. Yeah, so the summary, it would be okay to bring, to say experienced graphic designer with extensive experience in A, B, and C, seeking to enter the marketing or use these skills in marketing within consumer goods or just within the marketing field. So you can indicate that direction that you're trying to go in. The other thing is, sometimes you are considering a couple of directions for making a change. You may find it helpful to have 2 to 3 different versions of your resume that have a slightly different emphasis. That may make your job easier. The other thing is that while you're out there meeting people and networking in the new career field, feel free to ask people to give you feedback. What's missing? What would they like to see more of? Is it easy to read? Other things that you may want to add. So constantly getting feedback, whether it's from a career professional or just from people out in the field, and especially from hiring managers. And speaking of resources, getting help, I want to mention, so we have career programs. I'm listing a couple of upcoming webinars there. Webinar Live Boston workshop, also helping you think about what's next. The webinar Thinking You About Resilience and Not Being Burned Out, which might be the reason that you're looking for a career change. And we're also going to have a short NUsource introductory webinar, a half-hour webinar at the end of March. Listed here are our alumni career programs page. The Office of Career Design also does work with alumni for career coaching, resume reviews, and that kind of thing. And then also, if you think of topics that are helpful to your own career development, please let us know, because we're always looking to do different live events or virtual events. Anything else? Oh, so actually, I'd like to ask you to take a couple of minutes to just jot down what are some things you're going to do. It might be working on your resume. It might be people you're going to contact. You may be looking for associations. And if you'd be willing to share some next steps, please bring those into the chat box as well. And Jennifer, a lot of people do have career gaps. So it may be something, if there was any temp work or anything like that during that time, you can include that. Employers will sometimes ask you about a gap, so just being prepared for that. If you're able to show things that you were working on, and that's where maybe volunteer work can come into play. I think the good news is, I think people, employers are used to seeing different gaps. So if they see experience that they like, there's a good chance that they will still contact you, but ask you about it. So it may be more of a case of being prepared if there's not something that you can demonstrate during that time period. Again, I'm open for questions, as well as I'm interested in hearing some action steps that people are going to take next.
Michele, here are some earlier questions posted in the chat box. Still wondering if you can elaborate about cover letters. I know you mentioned they may not be as important, but how do we determine importance?
So I guess I would just say, I guess I would still err on the side of including one. Don't feel like you need to narrate your previous work history, but more highlight some relevant examples in the cover letter. And the other thing is to, in one sentence or two, show interest in that company, show that you've done your homework. If you have contacts that you've spoken to there, mention it. So you're showing your interest, your knowledge of the company, but more importantly, you're showing evidence that you can do the position. Often that's an opening paragraph, one or two short paragraphs and a closing. And the closing can be a good place to mention that you've done that research, that you know about the company.
Another one from earlier. I have trouble explaining I have the experience needed, but from parts of many past roles and never one full position. For example, I have done many aspects of program management, but I've never been an official program manager.
Okay. Great, and I think you can talk about that in an interview to say my program management skills experience occurred in these two positions, for example, and to speak about projects or what that role was in those positions. And that's a common thing, that especially for career changers, that you have done pieces of the work, but it wasn't your title. So I think that's the other thing about interviews, is you want to go in there knowing what you're hoping to speak about and highlight, and looking for opportunities to bring that out based on what the employers seem to be interested in. Which also reminds me of, some of you may be familiar with functional resumes that do focus more on skills and less on having paragraphs with each job or bullets with each job. I prefer to actually still go with a chronological resume. You may find it helpful to have these subsections where you divide your experience into, let's say, program management as one block and list the jobs that fall there, and maybe you had nonprofit management as another block and list those together. What recruiters tend not to like about functional resumes is that often it's just confusing. People list experiences, but it's not clear what job it was a part of. So it can backfire for that particular reason. And Arlene was asking about LinkedIn and whether to use dates given a concern about age. So it is fine to not include dates for your education, undergrad, grad, or certificates and that kind of thing. For employment experience, employers do like to see the actual years that you were working in a particular job. One way to work around that is sometimes people will, even on a resume, say previous experience and just summarize it. You know, previous experience included working in accounting and finance roles with these companies, or they might, so they find some way to summarize it, but not get into the dates. And again, that's a decision about relevance. Okay, Arlene's got some action steps: reviewing a resume, adding a summary, looking into ways to build up relevant training. Great. Anything else, action or questions? For those of you that are concerned about age, one thing in a summary is sometimes when people say 20 years experience doing X, that's excellent, except that if someone a lot younger might be looking at your resume. So I think I just tend to not always use the number, but more focus on the experience, like significant experience as a manager in IT. You don't actually need to quantify it if the years might be too many, even though that's a good thing. All right, adding a current course. And actually, even a current course can be, like, you can call it training. You can have a professional development section that can include training as well as associations. It looks like a few more people are adding comments or questions. I think on LinkedIn, when you go into the university experience, I know when you're creating it, I think there's a way to get around giving the dates. You may need to try to go in there and see if you can remove them. You may have to delete and re-enter. All right, we've got people tweaking their resumes and their summaries. That's great.
Michelle, here's a question that somebody submitted when they were registering for the webinar. Any tips for professionals re-entering the workforce after raising a family and/or providing elderly care?
Yes. Again, I am a big fan of iRelaunch just as a source of information. I would check out their website. Again, I think if you're re-entering after a significant break, you may want to look at what are some things I can do to get back in, either as a volunteer, temp work, part-time. So, you know, it may not be jumping right into that job right away. It may be building up your contacts, spending time networking, getting out there, finding some things to start adding, project-based work, so things like that. But I would focus on networking, and there's actually something that you can see through the iRelaunch site is in some fields, companies are starting to have professional returnships, is what they're called. So some companies are realizing that people who have taken a caregiving break are valuable employees, and they're actually setting up some programs to help people re-enter the workforce. But that is something that takes some strategy and some planning to kind of jump back in. And again, volunteer work can play a role, courses can play a role, just different things that can kind of get you back into the area that you're interested in. There are some clearinghouses sometimes for volunteer work. I don't remember if the United Way still has that. So things like that, and again, writing about, with your volunteer work, you can actually list some of the things that you're working on as a volunteer with the idea of showing your skills. And sometimes too, if you feel like it's a big hurdle that you're facing, it can be helpful. So between the Career Center here and myself, we do offer alumni some resume feedback and career strategizing. And then in some cases, it can be a great investment to work with a career coach because it can help you see things and move through some of this more quickly. And it is true that some returnships are very much focused in certain industries. So it may be a matter, and the other thing is, again, that idea of a two-step process. It may be taking one job that you feel like has potential for advancement, where the organization has that potential, but kind of, again, depending on how long the break has been, is ways to kind of get back in there step by step. But that is something that takes some strategizing. Okay, we're just seeing people typing a few more things. Yeah, and Jennifer, I'd be happy to strategize some more with you on the specifics of that. That would be great. Anything else as we get ready to wrap up here? Yes, so people can contact me in terms of, again, either the Career Center, if you live or work near campus, the Career Center actually has a lot of drop-in hours now where you can just pop in and things quickly. You can also get in touch with me in terms of resume or job search assistance. So I hope you all are leaving here with maybe 3 to 5 things that you're going to take action on in the next 2 weeks. I really appreciate the conversation here, the questions, the different scenarios of things that you're facing. And please let us know if there are other topics of interest. And we hope to see you on some additional webinars, and definitely check out NUsource. I think that's going to be a great resource and a great way to connect with other alumni. All right, we've got some people working on their resume. Excellent. Let us know if we can be of help, and thank you so much for coming.